Hey everybody, tonight I want to talk a little bit about the woodwork in my tank. Almost all of it's been collected by myself here from local sources, my local stream, down the reservoir, out in my backyard. Just the other day I went out and collected a bunch of stuff to put in my new tank that I've been working on, my waterfall tank, and I've got some pieces that are just branches out of trees, and I've got some pieces that are old rotten log. Some of it in some of my tanks has come from submerged under the water. I've even found some really nice gems on the side of the road just sort of buried down in the mud. If you get your eye in and you know what you're looking for, you can find some really good looking pieces of wood lying around. So I've been asked how I select it, how I pick what kind of wood is safe to put in my tanks, how I prepare it and treat it before I put it in my tanks to make sure it's safe, and so on and so forth. So today I want to talk a little bit about that. But I want to make it clear that this is not necessarily the way to do it. This is just the way I do it, and I'll talk more about my reasoning behind the way I do things, the way I do them. For one, I probably get asked why and how I do this a lot, because you'll notice this wood behind me is fairly significant in size, and you may be wondering how I put that in the stove and boil it or do whatever I'm going to do to it in order to treat it. And the secret is I really don't. I don't do a lot to it at all. I hose it off, and I'll use a bristle brush, like a scrub brush, and I get any loose dirt and mud off of it. If there's any rotten material, soft wood that's kind of, getting nasty, I'll scrape all that out and remove it down to where it's basically just the hard wood. And I'll try to remove as much of the bark as I can. And that's about it as far as preparation goes. But I've got to say, I generally only do that when I'm putting wood in tanks like this. It's a native tank. It's just fish I've caught down the street. If something happens to them, something happens to them, and I can always replace them easily and for free, essentially. I can just go catch some more fish in my minnow trap and restock this tank, and it's not that big a deal. Some of the other pieces of wood that I have in some of my tanks that have more significant fish in them, I did treat a little more thoroughly, but I've always found that there's no real way to do it other than putting it in an oven, if you can fit it in an oven, and basically get the temperature of the wood up above 165 degrees or thereabouts all the way through down into the core of the wood. So if you got a big piece of wood, it takes quite a while to do that. That will completely sterilize it. Or boiling it. If you got a pot big enough to fit the wood in it, and you can boil it for long enough again to get that temperature all the way through the wood, not just the surface area. Insects and microbes, fungus, all that kind of stuff, that bores all the way down, deep down inside the wood. So if you're concerned about that and you're trying to kill it, those are the only two ways I know for sure to do it. You put it in the oven and you bake it, or you put it in water and you boil it until it's heated all the way through. The problem with putting it in the oven is it dries it out. So if you found a nice piece of wood in the bottom of the stream and it's already waterlogged and ready to sink, and you heat it up like that, you're going to remove a ton of that moisture, and it's probably not going to want to sink anymore. It may even crack and break. You never know what's going to happen to it if you put it in the oven and heat it up like that. I would definitely recommend heating it slowly over time. But again, you're still going to, possibly end up with cracked pieces of wood and stuff like that if you're putting it in the oven. My philosophy behind it and my thoughts behind it is, first of all, as far as is there any type of wood that you should avoid because it releases toxins into the water or whatever. There might be somewhere, but I've never heard of it. I've heard people say there is, but no one's ever told me anything specific or given me any, this species of wood or that type of tree or whatever. I've never heard any details. So as far as I know, there's no wood around here that, and I can't speak for wherever you might be in the world, but around here in Maryland, North America, there's no trees that I know of that the wood releases toxins into the water. So when I go out and I'm looking for wood, I look for pieces of wood that I think are interesting looking. I look for the colors that I like. I look for the shape that I like, the size that I'm looking for. Preferably if I can find wood that's already pre-sunk. You know, I look around in the deep pools. I go to places where the wood's going to get collected when, you know, you have floods and storms. You get big piles of wood. That might look like a big jumbled pile of mess, but if you root through it, you can find some really nice looking wood in piles like that. I've gotten some really good stuff. In fact, this big long piece right here is an entire, you can't really call it a sapling necessarily, but if you could see the other end that we can't see on video right now, that's the roots down at that end. And I cut the branches off. So this is basically a small tree behind us that I just found piled up in the wreckage behind the washout from a storm drain one day near my local stream. And I scrubbed it off with the scrub brush. I hosed it off with my, you know, my garden hose and a brush, and I get it as physically clean as possible. And then I put it in the tank. You know, again, I don't think there's any wood out there that's going to leach toxins into the tank. Tannins, yes, that's fine. I want tannins to leach into the tank. That's good for your tank. As far as toxins and anything that's going to hurt your fish, I don't know. Again, I may be wrong, but I don't know of anything, and I don't worry about it because I've never heard of anything and I've never had any issues with it. The other thing is, what am I bringing home? Because you bring home a piece of wood you found in the stream or on the side of the road in the mud or whatever, and I guarantee you're bringing home a zoo. It's going to be full of little critters and microbial life and fungus and bacteria. It's going to be a treasure trove of life. And again, I just don't worry about it. My tank's an ecosystem. It's already a treasure trove of life. There's all kinds of bacteria and stuff going on in there. Could I bring home some sort of fungus or something that might then get on the fish? I suppose it's possible, but I don't know of any fungus that lives on wood and waits to latch onto fish once it's in a fish tank, or, you know, once fish swim past it in the stream, then, you know, it's either fungus that grows on wood or it's a fungal infection that the fish are going to get. And again, I could be wrong about this kind of stuff, but I've never had any issues with that. I don't know of any parasites that live in wood and then attack fish. If it's a parasite that's a fish parasite, it's going to live in fish. Now again, part of its life cycle might be, you know, it bores into the wood and incubates or something, and it comes out of the wood and attacks the fish. If there's an organism out there that does that, I don't know about it and I haven't heard of it. So I just don't worry about these kind of things very much. I've put wood in tanks that I can see little worms and stuff wiggling in and out of the holes, and I don't worry about them. If they crawl out, they're probably just going to be fish food, and worst case scenario, they're going to die, and it's just going to be bioload, you know, material. It breaks down no different really than any other, you know, decaying dead material that might be in the tank. So again, it's just not something I worry about it. The tank that's just behind where the camera's positioned right now is my waterfall tank, and I just took some really interesting stuff out of my yard yesterday. One of the pieces is just a branch that had fallen out of a tree long ago, and one end of it was kind of down in the dirt and covered in mud, so that was sort of wet and a little bit waterlogged. Squeaker just came in to say hello. That end was a little bit wet and waterlogged, but then the other end was bone dry. It was just a branch. It had dry bark all over it and everything. So I basically scrubbed all the soft, rotten part off of what was down in the mud. I hosed it off, got all the dirt and grunge off of it, and then I positioned it in the tank with the dry branch end sort of sticking up and out, and the part that was down in the mud sort of now looks like roots, and it actually looks kind of natural, like it's a rotten tree that's growing up, you know, or a tree that's growing up out of the water. And that was just a branch I found in the yard. Again, I've just never really worried about it. When I first was keeping fish years ago, I worried a lot about it. I used to try to soak the wood in bleach or hydrogen peroxide, or if I couldn't boil it, I'd get like a 10-gallon fish tank and I'd, you know, put it in my shower with the water on really hot, and I'd try to just get it in really, really hot water in hopes that might... I'll get Squeaker up here to say hello. That was Squeaker's little cameo. I was going to hold him, but I realized he's pressing up against the microphone, so you probably wouldn't have been able to hear me if I had kept him up there. But that's basically the long and short of it. I have gone out and bought plenty of wood for my tanks. I like Mopani wood. It's kind of expensive, but it's a really good looking wood. It's a dark brown. It's really dense, so even when it's dry, it still sinks. It lasts almost forever in your tanks. It rots away very, very slowly, because that's another thing to think about. Any wood you put in your tank is going to rot away over time. And the store-bought Mopani wood tends to last a very long time, even if you got a tank that's got like plecos or other fish that are chewing on it. So if you're going to buy wood, I definitely recommend the Mopani wood. I don't have a lot of experience with buying other types of wood, so I can't really say anything about that. But as far as when I look for wood, I look for wood that I like the way it looks. I go for the physical appearance. I also go for the practicality of it, the size. Am I going to get it to sink and stay underwater? Is it a branch that's going to be underwater? You know, it might be something that's just kind of sticking into the water, but then up and out. It just depends on your needs. So that's my 2 cents. Again, I'm sure there's professionals out there that are cringing when they hear this, because you should always, you know, sterilize anything you bring home and put in your tank. And if you've got a $300 fish, or if you've got a fish tank with sentimental fish in it or something like that, I would definitely recommend that. I'm not going to say just grab any old thing out of the backyard and throw it in your fish tank. Generally, when I do that, it's these types of tanks where no great loss, you know, relatively speaking, if something were to happen. But I've never really had an issue in the years I've been doing this, and I started by bringing rocks and fish tanks. From day one, I've done this with my fish tanks, and I've just never had an issue. The only problem I've ever had was in this tank, and I had a columnaris outbreak, and that had zero to do with wood. It was the fish that I'd put in the tank. I caught some fish down at the stream in my minnow trap, and I put some infected fish in the tank, and it wiped out almost every fish in the tank, and I kind of had to start from scratch. But I've never had an issue with the wood. So, you know, I was asked how I do it. That's how I do it. Is that how you're supposed to do it? I don't know. That's how I do it, and that's what I was asked, and that's all I can really share with you. So thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful. I hope that answered anybody's questions on my tanks and how I do it. So make sure you're subscribed, that way you won't miss anything I've got coming up. Make sure you got the notifications on, because I will be doing live streams more and more often, and if you got the notification bell rung, then you will get notified, obviously, when I go excuse me, when I go live, and you won't miss any of that. So again, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you got the notification bell on. Don't forget, this is my 125-gallon native tank. Thanks a lot for watching this one, and I hope to see you real soon in the next one.